Throughout history, free thinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and I'm here. She's laughing. She's laughing already. She knows performer, right? Yeah. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me, of course, is the last prophet, Prophet Armin Navabi, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hi, Armin. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. Just get on with it.
Okay. So, yeah, welcome. So what we're going to do is we're going to delve into a very lighthearted topic here. Okay, so this is, we have a special guest. I know I say that every time, but this time it actually is very special because this is somebody I've known for 30 years. I won't tell you how. Right?
So if you're a previous guest, he didn't mean it when you were on.
Yeah, so Simi Rahman.
Nice setup. Simi Rahman.
Simi, what? How do you pronounce it? Is it?
I don't know, man. I don't even know how to pronounce my name because when we lived in Dubai, they were like, "Oh, your name is Suraya."
Yeah.
No, it's Suraya.
Yeah, it's Suraya. Yeah. Okay. So that's your first name, but anyway. So we have
Simi.
Yeah, we have Simi Rahman. She is a pediatrician who's in California. We went to med school together. We've known each other for about 30 years now, and we recently had a conversation about dying and death. It's something both of us know very intimately, both professionally and personally. Personally, like all three of us have had experiences with this, and we're going to get into that. But Simi, as a pediatrician, as a physician, has seen her share of it. I am a pathologist, so I've actually done a lot of autopsies, and that was actually a life-changing experience for me. And it's one of the reasons that I'm here doing this stuff instead of still practicing medicine. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. In addition to that, Simi's also an ex-Muslim atheist who recently lost her father, so she had to process that as well. And we're going to talk about how we deal with this stuff, like how do atheists. One of the things that people who are religious say is that that religion provides us comfort. What happens after you? Where do you go? Where is that comfort? How does atheism give you that comfort? And that's what we're going to address. I don't think that rationalists and secularists and atheists have done a very good job of addressing that question. So we're going to really dive into it today. Simi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's quite the introduction. Not
Yes.
used to that lead up. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah, when we were back in med school, we were both sort of religious. We were dabbling in and out of it. We were trying to come up with like liberal interpretations of things and so on. But now here we are, and we're both, atheists. And if you are watching this on video, Simi, can you show your shirt?
Mm.
There you go. She's wearing an atheist shirt. So
I'm out.
What happened after that? What is your journey? Can you start with your story, how you were raised?
Okay.
You're raised in a Muslim family. Your parents were religious, and then what happened after that?
Yeah. Ali, you and I think, were my first experience of being able to talk about Islam with somebody who was knowledgeable about it. So I think you sell yourself short a little bit. Like, we haven't just always been like, I think more it was understanding that you had to know the scripture and you had to read and you had to learn. So I think my journey towards learning started there. But I think I'm with Armin on how I fell in love with Islam as a child, which was growing up in the Middle East and all the stories, right? The stories are placed there. They're just, you can imagine them happening and unfolding, like the whole story of the spider in the cave. What kid doesn't love that?
It's like Game of Thrones.
Right, right. I mean, it's just like mythological, right? And it was my only mythology that was available to me because my mythology from like my Bengali heritage was not accessible to me. I mean, this was the 80s when we didn't have any public libraries. There was like a once a year like book fair that came around, and I used to take like this empty box, and it would get filled up, and that was it. So we're talking about going from a place where questioning wasn't really a thing I knew how to do, and then in AKU kind of, and my parents were kind of, they got more religious as time went along, just like all of Bangladesh has. So I think they just kind of like got on this, escalator to nowhere, after independence, and they didn't know how it was going to pan out, but they made decisions based on like, oh, let's do what's right for our kids and their education and all that. The pragmatic decisions were made.
Right.
But my parents
you're Bangladeshi and you were raised in the UAE in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
You grew up, and then you were in Pakistan for so you have a very similar trajectory to mine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where we kind of like, and then I was going to make a mention about this in lieu of, all of us have probably had lots of transitions in our lives, right? And I think we forget that it's those transitions that make us grow. And that we've talked about this kind of like energy cycle that people's lives go through, right? Like sometimes when you're like in the doldrums, that just powers up your energy. So I think people who've lived in different cultures know how to kind of like evolve out of those things. And I wonder if that's why you and I were just like questioning these things, like why were we like so engaged with it? Because we found like things that were absurd, and we weren't afraid to say that they were absurd. That was one thing that I think I found there. And but I don't think I was ever like that crazy religious. Like I fasted, we did Eid. Like it was more of the cultural Islam that my parents practiced. And even later in their lives, when they got more conservative, they didn't really expect us to be more conservative Islamically. They more expected us to kind of conform according to what society wanted to see of their daughters. Like their expectations were always wrapped up in it, society's expectations of it, So what else? So there was that experience, and then actually it was going to New York for a residency and then being there during 9/11. I was in the Bronx and just a resident in my second year of medical residency. And I loved New York, but I was tired, exhausted, all those things. And I had just started to understand, like my favorite TV show at that point was The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And the thing that really struck me about him, this is 99, what struck me about him was I had never, right. And I never heard anybody in any country on any media be able to make fun of their leaders and to criticize their leaders in a way that rang true, And so I think I entered this kind of period after 9/11, I just kind of entered this period of questioning. So it really, because, the arguments that Muslims had to find themselves making were starting to evolve. And all of a sudden I was like, well, I don't actually think that's what happened, remember? And that's when I wrote that post. And actually it was writing that post and having it come out that pushed me out, because I don't know if I would have done that. And I got divorced along the way, there was that too. And I had like a life change.
The post that you're talking about, I should tell people, if they don't know what you're talking about, the post was that you wrote a post on Facebook about your experience and about leaving Islam and things like that that went viral. It was very insightful, and it ended up, I think Richard Dawkins ended up tweeting it out and talking about how it was brilliantly written. We'll link to that tweet in the description as well, and we'll link to the post so people can read it.
Yeah, and you posted it. Thank you for that. And you kind of gave it some life. And I think it was in engaging in those discussions, because before Facebook and social media, people like me, I was in Kansas City. That was my first experience of religiosity to a level that was higher than even the Middle East, right? So the Midwest, Islam in the Midwest was just like, it blew my mind wide open. I was like, what is going on? There's like hundreds of thousands of dollars being dropped on, into politics. There's a lot of like stuff happening in the Midwest.
Like Islam in the Midwest? You mean that Muslim communities there were donating a lot to politicians and
yeah. So just like very politically active, in the positive and the negative forms of that. There's a lot of political activism that's very like, oh, let's put more people into government and all of that. And then there's a lot of political activism that I would see in mosques. You've seen it where they'll put a picture of or play a video of an Israeli-Palestinian kind of like, heart-tugging video, and then everybody will be like, oh, let's donate to this cause. And it's like, you don't even know what you're donating to. Like after 9/11, when I went into the Midwest and I kind of saw that people were really banding around this idea of Islam as an identity in America, the dangers of it were very apparent to me, and I was just like, I need to get out of here in some way, shape, or form.
So at some point, Ali, let's move the conversation to the topic. Yeah.
But I just want to know. So that's when was the time when you actually just decided this is over and you started thinking of yourself as an atheist?
So I had, after 9/11, I graduated residency. I got married. I actually became more pious. Do you remember I was wearing a hijab and I was doing a lot more reading and going to like ISNA and all of that, like really dove deep into that culture in the first few years of my marriage, and kind of saw it from the inside. I've met Yusuf Islam, and I kind of caught up in the celebrity piece of it a little bit too. Just like there's this kind of community of just like speakers and stuff that really go you come across, and they have some really great ideas, and if you're a believer, it all sounds really great. But it was through that process, and I think it was a San Bernardino shooting. I honestly think like what I wrote in that Facebook post was literally my like catalyzing moment.
That was your coming out.
Like that was my literal coming out, because like you said earlier when we were talking, it's like understanding where the boundaries of your mind are and being able to fearlessly push just a little bit past them is something that is told to us as wrong, and is inculcated into our brain like circuitry as this is how you are supposed to be a good Muslim. You're supposed to stop yourself from thinking anything outside of this box. That was just like, to me, at the point in life I was in, I was having kids and thinking about education and, just like my education, and understanding how the brain worked and neurobiological science was moving through, right? Like there was just a lot of understanding that there's neuroplasticity. There's, you do a lot of damage to people when you steep them in bad ideas all their lives. Do you remember that cab we were in and there was a sea of green turbaned kids and you like slid into the back well? And I was like, what is going on?
Oh,
and you're like, they're Shia killers. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I had no idea there's shit like that.
Yeah, that was in Pakistan. Yeah, we were in a cabin. They wear green turbans. They were called Anjuman Sipai Sahaba, which is and the acronym was ASS. So I'd walk around everywhere on the walls. It said ass, ass, ass. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And then it turns out that they were Shia killers. So I was scared of ass for a very, very long time. The point is, sorry, is that homophobic? Is that homophobic?
No, not in your case.
No, but asking if it is homophobic might be.
Yeah, well, okay, listen, it's not just men. But so okay, let's so you go into this, and then recently, and I want to sort of start with a personal experience because that's something that Armin also went through. Both of you went through it more recently than I have. You became an atheist. Your father was very religious, right? Used to go to the mosque, used to pray. Your mother's religious as well. Your father ended up getting cancer, and then he died within the last year, right?
Yeah.
So when that happened, did your father know that? I mean, he knew that you were not religious. Number one, did you talk about it, and how did you personally process it after that?
Yes. So. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I mean, it'll be a year since he passed, like at the end of the summer. So it's still kind of in process. But once he was diagnosed, so just a preamble, like once I came out and that post came out, I went into kind of like, there was a lot of things that happened, family distance themselves, a lot of family distance themselves. And my parents definitely knew, and, you know, it definitely created a barrier with us. And they were never going to be okay with it. They were just going to tolerate it. But what I know is that they've understood all their lives that making their children good Muslims is part of their journey on this earth, right? So in one way, by being an atheist, I am off the bat denying my dad that, right? Automatically. Like I just start out not being able to like reconcile with him before he dies. And so, you know, my dad's, you know, my dad and I were close growing up. You know, he taught me how to check the oil in a car, and he taught me how to like look, change a bike tire. And I went with him everywhere. You know, he even sent me to buy cigarettes one day. I'll never forget, before he quit. You know, we were just pals. You know, I think at some point he didn't really see me as a boy, as a girl. You know, like at a certain point in my life, I wasn't always treated like a girl, and he was part of that, you know. And he always told me about all the stories and all of that. So I think for my dad, for our relationship, obviously, when I became a teenager, it got rocky. In my 20s, it was like, you know, he was my greatest champion to get my medical degree and all of that. So he supported me throughout, but I was also the rebellious one, and I was also outspoken, and he never kind of came at me with that. Like he never shamed me about like, oh, you shouldn't say things like this or whatever. He kind of left that to my mom in a way, which, you know. So in a way they were very tolerant. Even though they were conservative, they were very tolerant of ideas and talking. And we always talked politics whenever we left somewhere, like kind of like how you and your dad were, I think, you know. Like we would talk ideas too. We would talk about things. And so to have lost that was, you know, kind of challenging around the time that he died. And I think one of the things I did was ask him to write his memories down, his stories down, you know, which he did the last 18 months while he was in treatment. And the last thing he wrote in all caps, and it was this horrendous, just like, it's still on the website. It's just like this, like, you know, like an Elie Wiesel kind of like Holocaust. This is what was happening, like the trauma, his like final, like his worst trauma that he'd ever seen, you know, was something that he chose to then put on that website. And I feel like that's what I was hoping he would do. The 1971 Pakistan, the massacre. I mean, you know, it was they were just killing people in the streets and stuff. And so, you know, but then he's also the guy who sent me there 30 years later to go get my medical degree. So, you know, he was definitely an interesting person. So it was sad to not be able to access that, but I think more than me, what he was probably more kind of brought down by was the situation with my sister and her son, where she can't see him. And, you know, like he's had to watch my sister get slammed against a wall and suffer a concussion when she went to see her.
She was married to sort of a very religious guy too, right? Or...
Yeah, I mean, these are all just like thugs, you know. This guy went to Saudi Arabia, you know, that kind of person who like their parents were doctors and they just went to Saudi to like just make money. They didn't really care about the doctoring. And he went to school, and he probably went through all like high school and secondary and everything, never studying, just getting grades, you know, and then went to like a medical school in Ajman. So like no actual learning ever in his life, you know. And my sister meets him. And unfortunately, she at that time was very religious. And that was also the time I left for Aga Khan. So those things are all very interconnected, because my sister and I were always very close, you know. But when I left at 17, she was 12. And I think it really, like, she went into a depression after that.
Yeah. So How did you? So when when you are religious,
Mm-hmm.
right, and your dad probably believed this too, that there's an afterlife, you're going to meet again, because that I think is the most traumatic part of it. It's what I went through as well. And then you become an atheist.
Yeah.
Did you think at that time that, okay, I'm never going to see him again? Did you think that, okay, well, maybe there is something, may not be religious, maybe at some point there will be? What was going through your mind and what were you feeling?
I had thought, so while he was doing his journey, I was doing my journey of reading about all of this. Obviously, I'm going to read, and I had done like, kind of yoga, mindfulness, monism, that whole spectrum of trying to understand maybe how we're constituted, kind of like we're all one, we're all stardust, that kind of like mental perspective, and kind of coming to an understanding that he was going to go through his journey and I was going to have to support him through it. And I was going to have to give him exactly what he needed me to do, So we made sure that we were there for him, and that those experiences that he had towards the end were more like human. Like somehow our experiences stopped being about the ideas and who I am and who you are, and became more about like, just massaging his feet, and making sure that, we stayed with him as much as we could, that he wasn't alone, and I think that was in the moment. And so that's also part of like this understanding of monism, it's like the only thing that exists is now, right? There's no past, there's no future, there's only now. So the only place you can act is now. And so I kind of took that philosophical bent to it. And what that did was, I think it automatically just like let me drop all of my kind of like baggage about like who had treated whom, and what he had or had not, and what I wished for him to be to me, right? Like I think a cancer death, because it gives you some time, it gives you an understanding of like, okay, what matters now? Now that I have a shortened time span in which to think about this, what matters now? And so many things automatically drop away. It was like I was walking up a staircase thinking about this, and at the next flight, my brain had shifted. It was like one of those moments. It's like, oh, as soon as the realization hit me that, oh, next year on his birthday, he's not going to be here. It's like all the other shit just goes away, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, the only thing that becomes true is like what you guys meant to each other. So it kind of transcended, I think, religion in that way for me.
Yeah. So it wasn't even, Armin, was that, so I want to actually hear, because Armin has talked about this so many times where, Armin, when your mom passed, so how many years has it been now?
Don't ask. I don't keep track.
Yeah. So it's
yeah.
Did you were religious. You were very, we know your story and what you did because you believed in the afterlife. So the afterlife, I think, kind of traumatized you really badly at a young age. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, are you okay? So, that's why I was kind of for me, I don't relate to people who say like, I remember when she died, a whole bunch of people kept on telling me like, don't you, like on Facebook and everywhere, don't you wish there was an afterlife? Like, how do you deal with this? And I'm like, yeah, of course not. Like throughout my entire life, I was raised with the idea that most of us gonna end up in hell. And based on almost every religion out there, if there is an afterlife, my mom would be burning and screaming in pain right now. So I'm actually very A-okay with the fact that there is no afterlife, right? I'm sad that I'm never going to see her again, but I'm also very happy that I'm really, I know that she's not being tortured right now by a sadistic God. That gives me a lot of comfort, not having to be worried. I don't know exactly how many religious people, when most religious people, when they lose their loved ones, I don't know how many of them wonder, could they be in hell right now? Like, or did they just all convinced that they're in heaven? Or is that something in the back of their head that might be screaming, but they're trying not to pay attention to? that, okay, the afterlife comes with hell. It's just like, it's a package. It just doesn't come with heaven.
I don't think
But-
there's that level of thought, because I think that level of thought needs a level of empathy. And I do think religious thought makes us more narcissistic, or at least there's a correlation between the two. I think narcissistic people drift towards religiosity, and it serves their narcissism.
But I don't think it's I don't think it's that simple though, because I'll tell you, like, the experience of my aunt who had a child who was actually my daughter's age, how old my daughter is now, and this is in the late 70s, and she got childhood leukemia and she died when she was 3, right? So you can imagine how devastating that would be. So after that, when she was in therapy, the therapist, this is the story I heard, convinced her to have another child. So I think about a year and a half after the death of her first daughter, she had an older son too. She had another daughter, and then the second daughter, when she turned 3, she also died of childhood leukemia. So when I talked to her about it, and I wrote about this in my book, and when I talked to her about it, she became even more religious. I think because I think what she went through, the trauma that she went through, was so. I think it was just beyond her emotional capacity to handle. And she just put herself, she wasn't fundamentalist or anything. She was still sort of like the philosophical liberal religious. But she threw herself into this sort of service of God, thinking that it was a test, it sounds crazy to me, but that was her only hope that she would see them again.
Well, can I describe what that is?
What is it?
What that is, it's labeled God and it's labeled Islam, but what it is when something that traumatic happens to you, and basically what's just happened is our greatest fear is like that this reality and the person in front of us is poof gone, right? And what just left? Their body's still here. What is this magical element that just left their body? That's like that I'm missing, and that scares the living shit out of us, because that means we have to imagine our own death and know from moment to moment that we could die tomorrow, and we don't live that way. We like to live in this shuttered kind of like reality of like, let's decrease our anxieties by imagining that we have X number of years. Like,
actually, that is very interesting, because I think even as atheists, our mind is not ready to accept that. So, for example, when I was told that my mom has cancer, I was like trying to adjust and figure out what's going on, and I was like, okay, how much time do we have with her? Is it like 10 years, 5 years? And they were like, no, we're talking months here, maybe not even, right? And it wasn't even a month until between the time I realized that my mom has cancer and the time I lost her. So I was like, I didn't even know how to compute what was going on, right? But what's interesting is that I just checked that, by the way, it's been 6 years. I just realized only last week that my subconscious mind wasn't calculating that I don't have a mom until I think last week, because I have had, for the past 6 years, I have had constant dreams with me being with my family, and my mom was always there, right? And my mom was always there, and it's not even the fact that she's not there is not even a surprise. Like, she's just there, like we're watching a movie, we're going on a vacation, and she's just always there in the background. And only last week I finally had a dream where we were hanging out with each other and she wasn't there, and I don't know what that means, but I think like in the back of my head somewhere, it's just like she's still part of the family and she's not gone. I don't. So I don't.
Exact same thing, and I think I wrote about this once too. That, and it's been, by the way, in my case, it's been 2001, so it's been 19 years now. 19 years since my dad died. But every time I have a dream of everybody in the family hanging out, he's always there.
Yeah.
In fact, like I had an insane dream recently. I was telling Elishma about it, and it was that my dad was there and he was back, and I was really happy. I'm like, wow, you're back. Great. Do you know? And he's like, yep, this is it. And I was in an alternate reality or something where he was back. And I was like, this is great. And I was looking for my kid. And I was like, where's Zoe? And I was looking for her. and I couldn't find her. It's like, who's she? And it turned out that because he was back, I was in a parallel reality, and now I don't have my kid. And it's not because something happened to the kid. It's just that my daughter had never been born. So I went and in the dream, I hunted down Alishba, right? And I was like, listen, we have to make a kid. And she's like, get the fuck out of here. Who are you? Like, I don't get. And she was a complete asshole in the dream. She was
I don't know if this is a real dream or a joke, Armin.
No, it's not. I swear to God, this is a real dream.
The second time I'm hearing it. Whenever I hear a second one, it's done exactly the same way.
It is. I told you about it. And she was completely ignoring me, and I was trying to, the whole dream, it was like a movie. I was trying to convince her to mate with me, so I could have my daughter back. It was so.
You're like, it worked once.
And I was so mad at my dad. I was really pissed at him. I was like, why the fuck did you have to come back now? It was such a bizarre thing.
A lot of our podcast ends up Ali explaining how he was trying to convince somebody to mate with him.
There you go. That wasn't the point of the story.
It's a theme. It's a theme on this podcast. Is that right?
It's a theme.
Okay, so there's a more profound point. Is that you think when people think, oh, don't you wish we wish that our dads were here and everything, but it would be weird if he was back. Like it would be kind of strange.
Well, yeah, we live in a contingent universe, right? Like that's the other thing that death makes you have to confront. And I think that's the thing that we have the most trouble with, is that we are these sentient beings in this universe. We don't know how we got here. We are intelligent enough to understand partially the matrix, but not all of it. And we have no control over any of it.
Yeah.
We need a name. We need a name for it. We need a story for it. All of human history has been a destruction of every single stupid idea we've had about our existence, right?
Right.
In Huntington, the one that we went to, Armin, I wish I'd take you. Did I take you to that room where Galileo's telescope, like they have like a model of Galileo's telescope, and they have the moon there in the corner, so you can imagine what he saw at the scale that he saw it. It wasn't very tremendous, but that whole room has like this amazing kind of like ambiance. It's got like this painted sky, like one of those kind of constellation, like all the constellations are really like Roman, kind of picturesque things. And then all along the sides of that room are all the manuscripts that were dedicated to an Earth-centric idea of the universe. And that's when you realize that room makes me realize every time how long it takes to change human minds about anything.
Yeah,
about ideas. Like,
speaking
there
of
was
that,
pages of papyrus, like a paper.
Yeah,
dedicated.
I had a different experience than both of you. I mean, I know that you, like what you're saying, that in terms of you felt you were happy there wasn't an afterlife. I didn't actually think. I did think about whether I didn't think about whether he's going to go to heaven or not, or hell, or but I was just thinking, am I going to see him again? Because I was like missing something. I was like, am I going to see him again? How everybody says you're going to be reunited. We'll see each other in heaven. So it was by default. I thought he was going to be in heaven anyway, because he wasn't a bad guy, right? Because I always thought, well, Hitler and the pedophiles are going to be, child molesters are going to be in hell. So
thank you for the correction.
I know I've always tried to make that distinction. But my dad, he's not one of those, so he's going to end up in heaven. So I'm thinking this, and I remember the one thing, the first time, that I heard, is the thing that was going through my mind was that religion is the one thing I don't have it, and it provides so much comfort when someone dies. That's what I was thinking, and I don't have that comfort, and I was frustrated. And then my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, he was here from Montreal. He's also an atheist. He's a very militant kind of atheist who trolled the entire family and could get away with it.
I love those.
Yeah, because they were super religious people, and everybody'd be praying, and he'd be sitting in the corner laughing at them. And he was the oldest. He was in his late 70s, and there was a respect thing, so nobody could say anything to it. It was just ultimate power. But anyway, so he told me, and I asked him, I was like, am I gonna see him again? And he looked at me. He's like, you're a scientist. You know this. He's alive through you. I'm like, what? And he goes, he's alive through. Your genetic, his biology, his genetic essence is in you. You're 50% of what he was.
And
Okay,
you told me that at the last podcast, and I've been thinking about it at the
Yeah.
last thing.
Now, you can dissect it and you can say, okay, well, it doesn't mean you're
No, that gives me a lot of solace, actually.
But there's
It's
something
weird.
It
about
doesn't
it.
for me. I actually hate these. Can Alex? I'll be. Can I explain later about all
Yeah,
that?
no,
finish?
explain it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's one thing, one issue with religion, and I'm like, oh, your mom is alive, blah blah blah. You're gonna meet her, everything's fine. I mean, I'm not a mental health expert, so don't trust me on this, and maybe I'm happy to change my opinion on this. But I think we need to accept tragedy and cry over it and get devastated, and that's part of the healing process that we need to go through. We shouldn't sugarcoating it like this fucking. If we should admit to ourselves, okay, this is a fucking disaster. This fucking sucks. This fucking hurts. Just go through this pain, and the faster you go through it, and the faster you accept how fucking sucky the situation is, the healthier it is. Like, instead of masking it, because if you mask it, if you try to not express it, especially the expression of this tragedy is very important, you're just gonna live with it longer. It's gonna eat you up from inside for a much longer time if you don't just deal with how big of a tragedy this is.
Sure,
I think.
but this is part of it.
Two things I want to say to that.
Okay.
Actually, in response.
I just want to say one. I want to say one thing, just based on. I want to explain this a little bit better.
Let her get speak.
It was
especially when she's confirming what I'm saying.
I mean, okay. Sure.
You gotta give it. You gotta give
it. You guys can, totally.
No, I'm not confirming. I'm just like. Anyway, go on. You finish
what
your
I'm saying
point.
is, that's actually the point that I'm trying to make, Armin, is that when you go through these situations and you have to deal with grief, you have to deal with it in a way that acknowledges the reality of the tragedy and what happened. Okay, so. Right. Even if you think about things, and there is no, of course you want to accept it, you got to suck it up, right? But
no, don't suck it up.
No, not that, Armin.
No. Okay.
But even if you do, but in a way, that's kind of what it means, right? Just suck it up and just accept it. Even if you do that, and even if you deal with it and you grieve, this is part of it. Recognizing that, okay, there is no bullshit like God in the sky. There's no afterlife. There's no cloud, everybody meeting there. But hey, the way we are on this earth, he had me as his kid, and I am his biological and genetic essence. That's what he left here, and I am part of that, and I am that, right?
Totally,
I'm literally that is scientifically true,
right?
So it's not that it doesn't.
But that's not what I'm missing.
No.
Can I jump in?
Yeah. Okay.
Can I jump in? So when you were saying that. See, now I've forgotten my entire point.
See, Ali, you can't do this. Ali, come on.
It's not my fault that you forgot her point.
I know. I'm not good at this. No. So that whole thing. So a couple of things about that whole feeling, the pain of somebody's loss, right? So the closer you are to somebody, the stronger that feeling of loss is going to be, right? So love and the pain of love come together, right? Somebody actually wrote that recently, and I love that idea. That so if you love somebody, you will be pained at their loss, and that won't leave you all your life. And I think accepting that, like you're mentioning, Armin, moves us towards a greater developmental stage in our humanity. We're no longer toddlers that need comforting. We are more pragmatic, almost adults, where we're okay, pain comes with the good stuff. You want to live on this planet, those two things are going to have to balance out. We're going to have to just deal with it, and that's a pragmatic way of thinking, because honestly, we've realized that all our problems are way more complex than a simplistic God, right? Our problems are interconnected. We understand our problems to a greater degree than our understanding of a deity could ever explain. So
are we speaking from a position of? Oh,
okay. Now, can I say something?
Are we speaking? Yeah. Say something first. Okay.
Okay, but
oh my God, this is so unusual.
Yeah.
Are we speaking from a position of privilege in the sense that, look, we have, your dad died. All three of our parents actually died of cancer. I mean, it's something we knew ahead of time it was going to happen. They were taken care of, that healthcare, that had everything. But what about like the poor person who, for instance, like in Pakistan or India, whose kid gets murdered or raped, and supposing the killers go free, and they want that justice, and they can't have that justice. Another reason, it's not just the comfort of that we're going to live on forever and we're going to meet each other in heaven. It's also the comfort of, okay, this is like, if you're saying shitty tragedy, the people who did this to my kid and totally killed them and mutilated them and left them on the side of the road, they're up there, they're still back in their houses, and they got away with it.
So that's a double-edged sword. That's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It's more
because what it does to people is it defers your day of judgment about a problem to the afterlife, where you don't even have to think about it in the now. So you don't actually make laws, you don't actually solve the problem in the present, and you don't prevent it from happening. So by doing that, all we do is we ensure that that problem will continue to happen, and we all subsist in this kind of like mental moral injury as a culture, where you all decided we're all going to jump off the cliff at the same time and no one's going to bat an eyelid.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that if somebody goes through that in a religious society, they would just give up on it. Like, we can't do anything, but it's okay. Allah will give them justice.
Right, because there's too much comfort in that.
You're not religious, you're going to go out, get pissed off, take action.
You have more agency. That's agency too, right? Like, doesn't religion kind of take away people's agency? Like, I remember growing up in a place where I did not believe I had agency.
Armin.
Yeah.
I actually want to prefer, like in this episode, to shit on atheists a little bit more than the religious people. Another thing that religious atheists say, like, that pisses me off is like, oh yeah, like even Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying this. So like, oh no, like they're still alive, well, they're still there. Their energy, the particles there are in the universe, and they're in the tree, and they're in the like. No, like I didn't love my mom because of her particles. It's the way those particles were arranged that made her the arrangement of those particles in a way that made those particles my mom. That is my mom, not the particles themselves. Like, if I read Shakespeare and I enjoy Shakespeare, doesn't mean I love the alphabet. I don't enjoy the B's and A's and whatever arrangement you put them. They have to be in a certain different. They have to be arranged in a way that I enjoy it as a story, as a fiction. It's not the fucking alphabet that I'm in love with, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
You know what? You convinced me.
It's not about. Yeah, I understand. Look, I get what Armin's saying. This is why we have Armin here, right? Because gives us this. But there is an element. The human being.
It's a right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Not rational. Okay, so there are things that human beings do need comfort. Okay, so Armin, what you're talking about is one of the things that I don't think that atheists do. When you say all this stuff, it may make sense to me, it may make sense to Simi, right? But to someone who doesn't process everything in a very rational left brain sense, right? It's not going to resonate with them. And here's the problem.
It's not supposed to. It fucking sucks.
No, but
it just sucks. There's nothing to it other than that.
This is how you bridge the divide. People used to get pneumonia all the time. And it fucking sucked too. And people, you just got to accept it. There's no cure for this. We're going to die. And then penicillin came along. Now, people with pneumonia used to pray. They used to take all kinds of herbs and supplements, and none of that shit worked. There was just a placebo effect, and they thought it was helping them. That should be discouraged. But later on, when antibiotics came, there was a real way of dealing with it and giving people with pneumonia comfort. There are facts about death that we know. There are things that we know about death that, even if they don't make sense, I know that you're not into the particles and all of that stuff, but even if they don't make sense, like in the way that you'd want them to, they're not going to bring the person back. We all accept that. That person is not coming back.
I just say that that's poetic, like, language, though? But that's just poetic. Like, when Neil deGrasse Tyson's saying that, partly he's saying it poetically. But he's saying it
but we could say poetic things that are, there's something true, and
yeah, exactly. No, that's the point.
But there's also poetic things that is saying something bullshit. I mean, it's missing the point. I think it's missing the point, the entire point.
What is the point?
Right? The point is that my mom is not here, and what you're saying is not relevant to the fact that my mom is not here and she's never going to be here anymore. Like, I'm all for using poetic license to make things that are true even more poetic than like making science and nature and real things to market that to people in a poetic way. But this is not it. This is you're diverting
poetic?
attention from my real pain that I'm experiencing to something that is not relevant to the point that you're going.
I wouldn't
no,
tell you at the moment.
Ali, stop talking. I guess.
I gotta say one thing. I wouldn't tell you that the moment it happened. But okay, I'll ask Simi. Simi, in addition to what you're going to say, I'm going to ask you, what does it mean? Like, if it's poetic and it's true, if someone says, right, hey, Simi, well, the memory of your dad, the words that you wrote will live on. They're not saying that your dad's going to come back. They're not saying.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that. Oh, thank you for that information. I thought when my dad dies, all his works and all his books just disappears with him. That is so comforting, Ali. I did not even know that.
But it is. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It is. Okay. When someone tells you, when you tell your partner "I love you" and they tell you "I love you" every day, and you know that they do, why do you tell them that every day? Why do you like hearing it every day? It's because it's nice. It's comforting. That's why it does it. It's not like, oh yeah, well I already. Next time someone tells you, your partner tells you I love you, you can just say, hey, listen, oh, thank you for telling me. I didn't know that at all. Like, why do you have to say the obvious? Come on.
Wow.
That's not
one of them is true. The other one is misdirection. Okay, but go on, Simi.
So I love this. I love this discussion because I think it gets to this idea of Neil deGrasse Tyson as a spokesperson of science. Like, he is definitely his own brand, and I love the language he uses and the imagery he uses, and I definitely think he approaches it poetically too. So I do not think that attaching a little bit of like poetic license to his words is incorrect, but I discovered the meaning of the word poetry and poesis are the same. Right. So in pathology, we think of poesis, right, which is something being created out of something else, something coming together, even something new being made. Right. So hematopoiesis, and that's a process of blood cells being made. They bud off the stem cells. Yeah. And so poetry is kind of the same thing. All we're doing is we're taking ideas and we're doing exactly the same thing. We're just putting two new ideas together and seeing what pops up, And so this idea that, when I think about everything in this universe being made of a certain number of elements and there being a certain consistency, like I think I subscribe to Einstein's theory of like, that religious feeling, which is that there's a sense making that happens in this, universe that we are all a part of, right? Like we have, and I know it from the inside. You and I and anybody who does science and anatomy knows it from the inside. It's like we're all created similarly. We're all constituted very similarly, right? So in that way, that the general principles of being of reality are consistent, right? And so I think that gives me this kind of ability to jump into that poesis that Neil deGrasse Tyson's talking about, which is that it is okay to think about a person that you've lost and their particles that are out there. And I actually wrote about this once in my own kind of understanding of this. Is like, what is this idea that maybe in 30,000 years there'd be particles that were once part of this body here somewhere?
But that's true about shit as well.
Exactly. It means nothing. It's exactly the meaning that we put to it, right? And the meaning only exists in our poetic minds and in our poetic ideas. It doesn't exist in the real world. So I do think actually both of you are correct, but that's I think how I distinguish those two things.
Yeah.
So what I think is that when you're going through something like that, I think what we need in a situation like that is not somebody that makes us feel less sad. I think what we need is somebody who we can express to them how sad we are. And I think like if they try to make you less sad, to me it seems like they are dismissing how great of a tragedy. It comes off to me as like, no, you don't get it. This fucking sucks. Just let me be sad. And it kind of feels to me like when my mom died, a whole bunch of people tell me like, oh, her spirit, I hope her spirit is joy, like they say ruh shad in Persian. That means I hope her spirit is joyful. And I was being polite and I always said thank you, but in my mind I wanted to punch every one of those people in their face every time they say, oh, her spirit is, I'm sure her spirit is happy. I hope, like I know they meant well, but in that state of my mind I wanted to punch them in their faces, right? But I didn't, and I was very polite and I thanked them, right? But I just feel like it's a dismissal of like, no, dude, like, let this, like, you are making it seem like, how dare you, to me, how dare you try to suggest that this is anything short of a tragedy. That's what I was going through. But and I think like people say like, oh, well, this is what we have to tell people that are going through tragedy to make them less sad. No, just let them be sad and be there for them and listen to them, and that's what they need. Especially that I think I would need somebody to just let me be sad, express my sadness to them, especially if they've gone through something similar and they know how it feels. You'll just feel heard. You just feel like maybe somebody that you could hug you, or a shoulder to cry on, or something like that. Just the expression of sadness is what we need at that point, not somebody that will be like, oh, your sadness should be lower than what it is right now. No, fuck you.
There's definitely a performance of grief that's very cultural too, right? And then there's like real grief. So those two things are definitely separate. But I do think one of the things that happens when people simplify grief is to actually deny us its full expression, right? It's to deny us the fact that you could actually like crack jokes. Like one of my uncles died. That was the first death actually that I experienced as a teenager. Is one of my uncles was like in his early 30s and he died suddenly of a heart attack. And we had been kind of on our way to Bangladesh, and we heard in the airport, and we went straight to the clinic. And I was outside the door as he's like, being resuscitated. And after all, I mean, that was a sudden death, that's a different kind of death. And I was like 9 or something. And I remember that night, for whatever reason, after a whole day of everybody mourning and all of that, I started to just be funny. And my aunt started to like just loosen up and laugh and feel relieved. And for like 2 minutes, it just felt like everybody just could like, take a breath, and it's okay, like just to laugh about something and it's not disrespectful. And I don't know why that struck me as something that I wanted to do, but I guess I felt the tension.
That's the thing. So I think that I'm realizing, actually hearing this, and especially hearing what Armin saying, is that what Armin is saying is something a lot of people, I have seen people feel like that when they're faced with death, is that there are different people experience different things and they want different things. So in Armin's case, he's like, okay, I want to acknowledge the reality. I don't want you to comfort me. I'm like that actually in relationships. If there's some problem that I have that's going, and people come like, it'll all be okay. When people say, people love hearing it'll all be okay. Don't worry about it. I'm here for you. It'll all be okay. When I hear that, it drives me insane. Like, what are you talking about? What's your solution? What's your plan? How's it all going to be okay? Like, it's not just because you said it. Like, what the fuck are you? And there's a platitude. So I can, Armin, I can relate to that. But on the other hand, when my dad died, I noticed that, I accepted. I knew that it was done. It was all of that. But I kind of did like it when people were trying to make me feel better. Not because I necessarily felt better, but some people used to make me laugh. So I found it entertaining. Like that guy, when my friend's dads came and said, how old was he? How old was your dad? And I said, my dad was 63. It's like, oh, it's a wonderful age to die. The Prophet ﷺ was 63 when he died.
That shit gets me every time.
And that is the one thing I remember, because it made me laugh. And I didn't laugh in his face. The poor guy was trying to comfort me in his own stupid way. But for some reason, I just appreciated that, because it made me laugh. I told my brothers about it. It became a story. I still tell it to this day. And so
I think you know why that is.
it is good to feel better. You do feel better. That doesn't mean that if you're feeling
Yeah, I
better
am.
about
I mean, I'm not saying
thing,
don't be grateful. People do mean well, but
Right,
yeah,
right.
but
No, but
yeah.
I do think that
No,
we
but even if you
try
laugh,
to.
sorry, Jimmy. One last thing.
Right.
Even if you feel
Right.
better, and you're even if you feel better, that doesn't mean that you're not dealing with the reality of it.
Right.
If you laugh once in a while, or if you feel comforted once in a while, those things are not. I mean, we're human beings. We're complicated. It
Right,
doesn't mean that.
right.
It doesn't preclude it. But sorry,
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem is like when we walk around this planet and we exist on it as if we're not going to die, we don't have a relationship with our own death, you know, and how we want to think about it and what's a good death and what's a bad death, and how to honor the dead, and you know what to do at the end of your own life. When we don't think about that, that's where I think we lose the language, the ability to, you know, for these people who are coming up and saying these platitudes to actually say something that's, you know, or actually learn how to speak in that moment, right? Because that's also what's going on is everybody's very self-conscious and they don't want to say the wrong thing, but sometimes people like in the not wanting to say the wrong thing say the inadvertent wrong thing, you know. There's always that category. But also like I don't know that there's anything to be said, right? Like there's no words that are enough at that point in time because you're talking to somebody in pain, you know. So I do think like what Armin's talking about, like let somebody feel the pain, comes from that place, which is if you deny that this is painful, then you're denying how much you felt what that relationship with that person was. You know?
I mean, maybe a great strategy would be just to ask people what they would need instead of like guessing.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. Is like
I learned a lot from our friend Uzma Yunus. She was a year ahead of us, and she died I think 18 months ago.
Oh yeah, and she wrote a book, and she used to write about her treatment every day. And
yeah, she was wonderful. Like she and I weren't close when we were in med school, but we had like a lot of connections, and we actually, like, as she was going through her journey, we did a lot of correspondence back and forth, and about this whole thing, like dying with young kids and how do you prepare. And she was really brave and insightful about a lot of it. And she is a psychiatrist, right? She was a psychiatrist and with little kids, and she would strike that balance of allowing a fuller expression of grief while also understanding how complicated it was. So I feel like that helped me. And one of our friends is actually going through something like this, and it helps me to at least have some language around it. You know, I think a lot of the failure of, so some of the ways in which the way I think about my interruption of my relationship with my dad and kind of our inability to connect at the end of his life is a failure of language to some extent. Like he and I stopped really talking, you know?
Yeah. It's go on, Armin.
One thing, can I continue shitting on atheists?
Yes, please do.
One thing I don't understand is, again, sorry, I know we have some people who disagree with what I'm about to say, but whatever, suck it up.
Surprise.
Yeah, so no, but a lot of atheists keep thinking that, you know what, death is part of reality. It's the natural order of things. We need to learn to accept it. All good things have to come to an end anyways. Who wants to live forever? Eternal.
Oh, you're talking about the nihilists.
No, people that say like life is enjoyable, enjoy it while you last. I mean, I agree with that part. You can't change it, right? And the fact that if you had eternal, like life is good, like nihilists like do not say that, but life is good, but it was good while it lasted. It ends, and just learn to enjoy it while it lasts. And you know, living forever is not that appealing, anyways. You will get life is good because it's not infinite, right? That's what they say.
Yeah, for sure.
I disagree.
Why? This is interesting.
I mean, death is a fucking disease, and it will be cured one day, and every single minute that we delay eradicating death is, I don't know how many thousands of people that didn't need to die, and died.
That might happen. It's just we're nowhere near close enough to deal with that. But that's a plausible kind of like future.
I think we're getting close. I think if we die, if we talking here die, we are the unluckiest generation that has ever lived, because we were the last people who died. We're probably the last generation of people who died.
That supposes that we have an infinitely resourced planet that's not going to irretrievably. Our technology is going to stop developing.
With space exploration. I don't know.
No, you don't need space exploration. We don't need that much resources once we figure out how to live independently from our bodies.
You know what? If we turn off, I mean, it's plausible if we have like turn off the telomeres and all that stuff.
And technically, we don't need to achieve all of that now. All we need to achieve now to reach immortality for the next generation is to extend our lives to more than 100 years. And if you could extend lives to more than 100 years, then they will live long enough to experience immortality being achieved. Like, I'm not saying immortality will be achieved in the next 50 years, but if you just manage to extend people's life right now to live long enough, they will see immortality being achieved. That's all.
And it's really interesting when you talk about experience, right? So it's a really like powerful idea, because is experience a quantitative thing or a qualitative thing? Like, is it better to have more experiences, or is it better to just have better
more of good experience? More of good. Okay, if you live infinite life, you're going to have more of good experiences. So it's going to be both.
You could say that. I do.
And almost zero bad experiences.
How much of our experiences are shaped by whether they're good or not, are shaped by the fact that we don't have a whole lot of time. Like, the thing is, if you have 20 minutes to do something and you do, there's some things where the quality of the experience is directly influenced by the fact that you're young, or you have a body, or you have, because you're talking about, like, if you're talking about transhumanism, if you're talking about cybernetics and incorporating sort of digitally made organs into ourselves and extending ourselves digitally, and copying our consciousness to I don't know, whatever it is, all of those things that people talk about in terms of immortality, then the nature of what a quality experience will be very different, and we don't know what
superior.
It is.
We would be able to experience pleasures and happiness in ways that our brains right now is not even capable of imagining. But go on, sorry, Simi.
Possibly. I mean, we're definitely different from the humanoids that were here 30,000 years ago. I mean, you can't deny that. Our experiences. Not that much.
Oh, goodbye.
Right, but no, for sure. Like, our experience is way different.
Experiences.
Like,
okay.
Our experience because of our experiences, our ability to compute and our ability to think of things, right? So what you're talking about is actually something that there's a writer who is a sci-fi. This is the plot of a sci-fi novel where something an envelope kind of comes up around the Earth, and for whatever reason, it creates this time warp in which the people on the moon and the people on Earth age differently. And the novel has kind of like this conceit where they're talking about how there's somebody who's lived for 500 years. And it's a really interesting kind of like, because it's humans, right? Like, we have to imagine that these things that you're talking about, Armin, are not just happening to like the imaginary future humanoid who is better than us. It's happening to real humans that are flawed and are just these biological organisms in our environment on some level, right? We're also chimps. So we also have to remember that we are a complex organism, that we have a reptilian brain, and we have an emotional cortex, and we have all of these, just all of our evolution's kind of encoded in our bodies.
Yeah, but we could go beyond our evolution at some point.
Yeah,
we can direct our evolution, sure.
I think there's other ways
to modify it genetically.
Yeah, I mean, we have done it. We have done just the act of writing things down has changed our evolutionary pathway. Like, the whole trajectory of modern technologies, because we were able to write shit down, so people didn't forget and die. Their good ideas didn't die.
Our phones are kind of like the fact that we have everything on our cell phone. That's an extension of ourselves as well, because You know, there was this, like, we
Right.
have infinite knowledge. All of us have now.
Right.
Because, you know, it's not a chip implanted in our brain. It takes a little bit of
That's
effort.
a
and little bit of
gimmick.
typing,
That's
but
a gimmick. But in reality, you're right.
it is.
We are like technology-enabled humans.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of, it's not even about how we manipulate ourselves. It's also how we manipulate the environment. Like, if we can manipulate time, for instance, you know, like if you go to a place that is sort of has hyperdense matter or a higher gravitational force, spend 3 hours there, come back here, and then you're 21 years into the future, and then take another trip there, and then you're 21
Right.
years.
We live in a trippy universe where age is just dumb, you know?
Yeah, these things are possible, like theoretically, right now. But
there will happen. Like you can't avoid that. And when it does
that's
happen,
one possible reality.
yeah,
I mean, I would say probable reality more than possible.
Okay.
But but I think when it does happen, the humanity will be regretting not putting all our resources on this. Like we would like future generations are going to be wonder why we were focused on anything else where we could have saved so many people from death. And yet, here's another thing: if people in a world where people don't have to die, life, you know, people are like, oh, I don't like that. Well, guess what? I don't think it's going to be mandatory. You could check out anytime you want. Right? So I don't think
it's like that show Altered Carbon.
Yeah.
Have you guys watched it?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh my!
I just wanted to make one. I wanted to make one zinger comment for Armin. So Armin, what you're saying is that we shouldn't accept death as a reality, right?
No, we should defeat death.
There you go. Okay. All right.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that's.
Well, it's also a philosophical bent, right? It's like accepting death as a reality is it's on a spectrum from like accepting it as an eventuality, accepting it as in the present, or accepting it as like you want to actually move towards death, right? Like it's actually desirable. So we don't want to accept death to the point where it's desirable. But I do believe that as of now, with the number of deaths coming up, about 300,000 projected by the end of the summer, we are all dealing with death right now, right? I mean, that's another reason why this is so topical, because we're all preparing.
300,000 for what? From what?
COVID in the US.
COVID.
Okay. So that's what's so interesting to me, because like we say, like, oh my God, 300,000 from COVID, and we consider COVID like a deadly disease. But the death, old age death, I don't know how many people die from like that's a disease that is killing way more people. Like,
right.
It's interesting to me that is not recognized as a disease in itself, like the self-destructive nature of our body when it comes to a certain age. That's a disease that requires a cure. And I think once we find a cure to that, future generations are going to even have a hard time comprehending how we lived with it. People are like, wait, so they love somebody and they just, like, you know how, for example, today we look at previous generations and we're like, how could people live like this? What the hell? I think future generations are going to look at us and like, how could people even live? They love somebody with all their lives and they just had to say goodbye and would never see them again. And then people had to accept the fact that they will end and everything will stop and they will never experience it. And they accepted that as part of their reality. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that being the norm? Holy shit!
And they told themselves fairy tales.
Yes. Like, I think once we get rid of death, people will not even be able, like, the same way we talk about the like child mortality. Like, oh my God, can you believe like people had to bury half of their children before the age of 5? How did people not get depressed for all their lives after that because of this experience? Like, how could people live like that? That's how future generations are going to look at death.
Well, I guess if we're going to get rid of death, we're going to have to probably adopt a preventive strategy rather than a curative one, right, Simi?
So yes, very true. But I do think what you're talking about also is that human consciousness will be very different. So someone once said that the 17th century human was the last gentleman. You know, there's this idea of the 17th century as being this flourishing of the human and the ideas of self, and like, you know, the transcendentalists kind of have their ideas there. A lot of like there's a lot of philosophical kind of interlacing between this idea of the human in nature and man in nature, right? Like the 17th century. I do believe that, and that changed over time. Then industrialization took over, and this concept of man as part of nature kind of went away, and we started to think of ourselves as widgets and numbers, and the, you know, like you said, you know, like 300,000. Some people I've heard arguing like, oh, it's 300,000. That's how many people die naturally anyway. Why is that a difference? You know, the difference is the experience of the people dying. They didn't have to go through that experience. You know, it's not the numbers, it's the human experience that we're all collectively putting ourselves through. And so I feel like the future generations that have achieved immortality would look back at us, and there's probably going to be a bit of nostalgia too, of like, oh, they were the last ones to know what it was to have a finite conscious experience, and therefore maybe they treated their time differently. Maybe they were always in a rush to get somewhere and were very industrious because they had so many ideas and they really wanted to make the most of it. Whereas we've got all the time in the world. It's like, we've got no pressure. You know, I'm just going to take my time. Like nobody, like you have that quote, Ali, on your emails, right? About Shakespeare and Chris Cornell, right?
Mm.
Like Chris Cornell said, what, like Shakespeare was Shakespeare.
Like Shakespeare was able to do, I'll look it up, but I'll actually find the quote exactly, but go on.
Yeah, so it's like the experience of being alive is going to be fundamentally different, just like the experience of living in caves was different, you know? Sometimes when we go out camping, right? No, yeah, in some ways it's better. And sometimes when we go out camping, we enjoy that piece of it. We enjoy that piece of being unfettered and just being out in the open.
No, but right now, I mean,
the reason. Sorry, there's a delay. Go on.
I'm just saying right now, our experiences are way better than the cavemen. And just like right now, we could go experience being in a cave when we want. I think future generations are also going to have much superior experiences than us today. And if they miss death, they could experience it if they like. Right? So,
that's very true. It's optional. That's very true. And that might actually be an interesting kind of like question to ask, is like, given the concept of immortality, if that becomes a reality, how many people would actually choose to die? That would be an interesting poll to have, really, like live, right? Like right now, you can just ask your audience, like, hey.
The quote you're talking about, Simi, was Chris Cornell said this. He said, "The reason there's no modern day Shakespeare is because he didn't have anything to do except sit in a room with a candle and think."
Right.
Yeah. So.
And imagine.
Let's move to, because we have a little bit of time left. So one of the things, Stephen Fry was interviewed by some interviewer, and he asked him, he's like, if you could say something to God, right, what would you say? And
I remember that. It's a very powerful thing he said.
Yeah, so he lost it. And the first thing he said was, he's like, bone cancer in children. Like, what is wrong with you? Bone cancer, and that is the thing that people, when people say, well, how do you believe there's no God? What about all of the wonderful things here? Like,
but you know what he just demonstrated with that quote?
What?
He demonstrated that we are better than our gods.
Yeah.
We're better than the gods we believe created us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of the unleashing of, not immortality, but I think what I believe in is happening right now, and we have access to, is this unleashing of our potential as human beings, right? Mm-hmm. Is if we were to let go of God, what we've just done is unshackled everybody's brains. And in that case, I do think your science experiment will come true. But until we do, it's not going to.
I have the devil's advocate religious response to that, by the way, Ali, if you're interested, once you're done.
I love religious responses to everything.
Okay, so bone cancer in children. Do you want me to respond to that as a religious person with my religious hat on?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is because you atheists do not comprehend. You guys as atheists, with your arrogance, fail to recognize the greatness of God and the greatness of his plan. You guys are looking at your fraction of a second life that you have on this world, and you're comparing, you have no idea how insignificant all our experiences in this life is compared to the eternal life that God has planned for us. The misery and pain that anybody experiences in this life is going to bring them closer to God, and becoming closer to God is going to give you much more pleasures and happiness in the afterlife, which is going to make the worst experiences that you had while you were alive feel like just like a little tapping, like a little bit of a pain on your fingertip, if you compare that to like the pain coming from God and the misery coming from God in this life. If you realize what it could do for you, you would consider it a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a sick shit. That's some sick shit that Hitch really like slaps down Mother Teresa for, right? Like that was Hitch's entire point against Mother Teresa.
That's a great argument for suicide too. That's a
right.
Suicide is a sin. Suicide is a sin, Ali. If you knew you're Islam, you wouldn't say that. That would take you away from God.
An argument for the mafia, because once you're in, you can't get out, and once you're in, you have to go through shit.
Right. So I want to go back to Armin's language. Can we do that for a second?
Yeah.
Every single thing you said, right? Every sentence. I saw that you know that the way the structure works. The structure is you take something real that happens in somebody's experience. Oh, you suffering in your real time. And then you attach it to a magical consequence of it. And if you keep that going, it becomes its own logic.
And guilt. Right? You throw in guilt.
Right.
You make them feel bad for feeling their suffering.
For even imagining that what you just said is not even true. Like it is fake news to the max. It's like, you believe coronavirus is real. What the fuck is wrong with you? It's the government. I'm not wearing a mask. It's the same.
I mean, I think that's the only appropriate response to it, because anything else other than, okay, fine, that would be all true, except your God is not real. Like doesn't work, because if their God was real, I mean, they have a point, but the only argument is like, well, okay, sure, but this is all fairy tales anyways, right?
Yeah, I think that's where
told that by people, though. I've actually have been told that by people all my life, as all of us have, and my response to it has always been, okay, show it to me. Yeah. Why there's no God?
You both wrote books on this, okay?
And this is why you have to buy my book, Why There Is No God. Shameless plug.
Yeah. So that. It's but we the thing is that it's also when people say that, you turn around and you say, well, okay, show it to me. You're telling me all this stuff, and you're telling me not to feel bad for my suffering, because everything is going to be great afterwards. Show it to me.
Well, here's the thing, and I think the thing that I've realized over this part in time is like argumentation. We know this, right? The argumentation kind of makes people feel like they're being attacked, and now in this political climate where the I don't know, the Islamic jihadists, the non-secular jihadists have married leftist politics. It's like you just can't even say anything anymore about how damaging it is. But I lost my point.
So Simi, when Stephen Fry said that, right, bone cancer in children, you're a pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've probably seen your share of really terrible things that can happen to kids, and also obviously really good things. You wouldn't be in it if it wasn't rewarding, because you can fix a lot of those things.
Right.
But when you see something like the bone cancer in children, how do people deal with it, and how do you, as an atheist, how do you deal with everything from not just personally dealing with it, also as a mother, but also talking to parents, the kind of things that you say to help them process it?
Yeah, that's big.
If they're religious, for example, how do you approach that? If they're not, how do you,
Right. There's there's parts of this that are very much professional related, like related to the profession of medicine, which is there's a standard way in which we do these things, where my religion actually doesn't come into it, right? The way I treat people in my work, at least, is this is your experience. My job is to help shepherd you through this experience to the best of my ability. And I will bring everything that you would get otherwise from a person who was not me. And I will, make sure that if it's something I can't provide, that I find somebody who can provide it for you, right? Like, because this is about their experience. So what we've done has been, and I'm doing it in a residency education environment, right? So what I'm also doing is modeling a lot of the, like, keeping spaces open for the humane piece of it to happen. And that there's some satisfaction to that, because one of the things that American medicine definitely doesn't do well yet, but it's starting to do in little pockets, is understanding how to die and understanding that the experience of death is not the way we see it on TV. That there is a process to it, that there's a lot more information we know about it now, the reality of it, and we have a way of lessening suffering, allowing people to bring meaning to the end of their life, of talking about the journey of it. There's this text we teach in the medical school, and it's very famous now. It's The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. It's a short story or a novella. And in it, it's basically a doctor who's he's a lawyer who's dying, and the entire thing is how pissed off he is about the fact that nobody else is going to acknowledge that he's dying. Like, so there's this loneliness of dying in the midst of a lot of people, but if you can't actually admit to somebody, I'm actually dying here, and that person is with you on that journey. So I saw this one thing that actually has never been performed again. It was Ira Glass had hosted a reading of Donald Hall's poems. His wife is also a poet, so these are these two poets who just like lived their entire lives and were totally in love with each other. I mean, they've written some beautiful shit, and their experience of like a relationship is, it's beautiful, and it's very very real and very rich. And he writes about the process of watching her die. And he writes about it poetically. He does it in a way in which when Ira Glass was reading this on stage, he had like two women behind him, just kind of like doing some sort of interpretive whatever with a table and a chair. And it looked amazing. And I was crying because one of the things that it brought to me was that it's an experience. It's not about this person was here then and is gone now. It's what experiences did you have while they were here? What experiences were you able to be part of or allow them to have when they were dying? And also then how does knowing that person or having that relationship enrich your future experiences, right? Like, I love the whole like Day of the Dead thing that we do over here. And this whole concept of like honoring your ancestors and this like American Mexican culture. Do you know what I'm talking about, right? Dios de los Muertos.
No. Explain it.
Oh, so it's pretty big in LA because we're kind of on the east side of LA, and there's a lot of Hispanic Latino culture. And one of the things they do is there's one night in which it's called the Day of the Dead, and on that night, like, everybody goes to churchyards and things like that, and they decorate them and they bring food and everything, and they make their altars, and it's around people's graves, but what they're kind of doing is just congregating together around the idea of having ancestors, right? This idea of having, and Disney's romanticized it, in like, I think the movie Coco. All right. So it's that kind of thing. So this idea of every culture having a different way of looking at death, and that there's multiple ways of looking at it. It's just, I'm enriched every time I hear about another way of looking at death, right? Because it adds to my understanding of it. It adds to my ability to connect with the experience when I die, right? So there's like this.
Yeah. No, I was thinking as a as a pathologist, I realized one of the motivating factors, and this kind of goes back to that idea of immortality, Armin, is that I think about it every day. Like I remember every day that I'm going to die. So I need to do it. It's a motivating factor. And
Are you okay?
No, I was never in that mindset. It's just that when I did, to explain to you what happens in pathology is you go in and, right from your residency, you're doing autopsies. And when you do autopsies, that's actually, you make the Y incision, you open them up, you have to take out their organs in different blocks. So, the heart and lungs together, you cut across the head because, you want to make sure that the hairline is sort of preserved for the funeral, the showing. So you have to do it from ear to ear over the top of the head. Then you pull the face and the scalp down over the skull. And then you saw around the skull. You take out the brain, and you put it back in. So you put the person back intact. But at some point, their scalp is over their face, and it's just
that should freak me out. That always freaked me out whenever I went to the morgue. I couldn't deal with that. The face over.
The face, yeah. So it is. It's a really. So you really just see them as objects, but then you also realize that this is going to be you. This is what it's going to be like. You can't tell if they're billionaires, if they're homeless. I've already said this before. You can't tell.
You sound like a Muslim now.
Huh?
You know how they say, like, when we die, we don't take any of our belongings with us. The billionaire and the bigger, and this.
They're right about that. I think
that's the false humility of Islam, though. That's like Muslims taking a different idea and then attaching it, just like you had done. Remember, take a good idea, attach it to a bad idea.
No, but I'm saying that they don't take anything. I'm not just saying, and if they're saying that the Muslims are actually right about that, we really don't take anything. So we have they're just basically naked bodies with a toe tag on a steel table, and my job was to cut them open and to just really dissect them as much as I could to find out what caused them to die. And I did this with old people. I did it with young people. I did it with people who'd been stabbed. I did it with children. So there was a pediatric component to it. So everything from aborted fetuses who died in the womb or for whatever reason to 4-year-old kid who had, MRSA, Staph aureus, is an antibiotic resistant infection. So I did all of these things, and it just made me think about death all the time. There were times when I was like 7, 8, 9 p.m. when it was dark outside. I was alone in the morgue around, and it started feeling comforting. It eventually started. Initially, it was very scary the first couple of times. Later, and I was like, okay, so I'm in a room. Basically, the next 2 rooms are full of drawers with dead bodies in it, and I should be scared. But why am I scared? I'm more scared of living people. Like, what are these people going to do to me? They're not going to do
right. That's actually the safest place in a city.
Even if they did rise up from the dead and they all came at me like zombies.
You're laughing. I'm not kidding, Armin.
Like, even if that happened, what could they do with me? They all died of
they're all
diseases.
Yeah, zombies are not real. We know that.
Yes, I could take them all on.
I mean, wouldn't that be awesome though if they start walking like that, like a real life zombie fight?
But that's not going to happen. Like I knew that wasn't going to happen.
I know, but that would be awesome.
Yeah.
So
I'm saying that would be exciting. It wouldn't be scary because they're all like weak and like I don't know, like zombie. They died and they probably been there for a while. Their muscles are not going to be work very very well. Like zombie movies are not realistic. Like you see, like they're
not realistic.
And then, like. No, like they need to make it somewhat realistic for the movie to be interesting, right? But sometimes I'm looking at a zombie running at the person, and I'm looking at the bone that there's no muscle attached to that bone. I'm like, okay, how is that bone moving though?
There you go.
That's pulling at that bone that this guy is running so fast.
This is because you know that you live in a contingent universe where you need muscles on bone to run.
Yeah, I can testify to that.
Things work a certain way.
But for me, and I told Simi this in our earlier conversation too, is that's why I developed at that time. I realized one thing: that death is a liberator. No matter how bad things get, you're like, my life sucks. I'm frustrated. I'm suicidally depressed. I disagree. No matter how bad life gets, there's always a way out.
That's a slightly slippery idea.
No, oh my God. Hi, guys. We are not, if anybody is having suicidal thoughts because of what Ali is saying, we're not encouraging any of what Ali
We're just gonna.
completely denounced.
You guys need to
already
put
fucking
the suicide
demonetized. It
hotline
doesn't
number down there.
Yes, suicide hotline, link in the description. Please call if you ever have any suicidal thoughts.
Let me.
What the hell
just
are you
get-
doing, Ali?
Ali, that includes you.
No, but let me tell you, I know it's a good thing. It's a liberating thing because what happens
No,
is,
it's not.
Armin,
Life is good.
Hey.
Shut up, Ali. What are you doing?
why aren't you letting me grieve? No, this isn't even about grief. And saying
You
He's grieving about his own imaginary death. That's.
I'm grieving
No.
over the fact that we could get sued, and then
Hey,
maybe
this thing, okay, that realization that death is so real after getting my hands into it, after getting all the bodily fluids all over my gown and sometimes in my face, and all these things happen. After I realized that that made me want to switch out of clinical medicine and follow what I wanted to do. That made me not want to necessarily please people all the time, right? Especially people who want you to please them. It changed a lot of things about me, and it made me realize that this could happen to me anytime. So I need to live in the moment, make the best of it, and no matter how bad things get, if it gets bad, death did not scare me anymore.
Can I say something, Ali, without you
I
interrupting
actually
me?
have a suicide plan. I have a suicide plan in a good way as an exit strategy.
Jesus Christ. Okay, can I say something, Ali, without you interrupting me?
Yeah.
So I know he's going to interrupt me just despite. Yeah.
No, I won't.
You guys are like an old married couple. Seriously, it's adorable.
Yeah.
The Pakistani and you're Iranian, right?
Oh yes.
You're like a couple of guys I would have hung out with in high school.
He's too young.
You know what's more liberating than if your life sucks right now? What's more liberating than death is life and your chance and ability to be able to improve things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you are at the bottom and you think things can't get any worse, then there's only one way to go. Things could only get better. That's a liberating thing to think about.
Well,
you have nothing else to lose, so you might as well.
An Alzheimer's patient, or someone who gets diagnosed with early Parkinson's, who knows they're on cognitive decline, and there's no.
Well, I do believe.
Yeah, those are definitely accepted.
Yeah, and for those rare situations, I believe in death with dignity and suicide. What is it called? When it comes assisted suicide and all that? I think that's a great thing.
That's different, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like, don't be like, okay, this sucks, life sucks, fuck it, I'm out of here. Like, come on, there's so many things.
Supposing you're in a situation where your entire family dies in a car crash, you're under mountains of debt, and your house is about to get taken over, and there's just absolutely nowhere you can go. You're going to go to jail or be for the rest. It's terrible thing.
Okay. There's
a way out. I'm not encouraging suicide. Okay, that's a bad.
There's this story that came out this week, right, about the kid who was investing, and his account was like $750,000 in negative, and he committed suicide because he was 22 or something. It's called Robinhood. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of it's like a place where just recently, because of the coronavirus, they're actively recruiting people who they pay to do these trades. And it's this weird thing that happened where this guy, he's just 22, doesn't know anything about anything. But because of the way the stock market's been going, there's a lot of this kind of stuff happening. And he accrued a $750,000 negative balance, and he killed himself. And that's the kind of, that is where I think you need to be aware also, is that there is a point in everybody's brain in which it becomes that lockstep, right? Yes. And that's where you want to prevent that idea from going, is that once you've decided, then there is an action potential kind of piece of it. And I think I want to stay away from that idea, because I do believe that that's dangerous territory.
I understand. Okay, so
we have to be responsible about the ideas we're putting out there.
I agree. So, let me give an analogy to explain what
Armin just and I've heard you say this before, and I think it's the audience to which you can kind of expect that to be received in a way
No, you just wrote a comment that says all these promoting suicide. That's not what I'm doing. Okay, I have to. Sorry, Simi, I have to interrupt because this is coming.
Go on.
Really, I'm very inarticulate. This is the analogy. It's like if you are trapped in a room and the room has a lot of great things. It's a huge room. You can do anything you want in it, right? But the door is locked. If the door is locked, you're going to feel like you're trapped. But if you know the door is open, you don't have to go out that door. You should not go out that door. You should make the most of the room that you're in. Okay? But if you know that that door is open, you can go out anywhere you want to, you're going to enjoy your time in the room a lot more. You'll spend more time there. You'll value it more. That's all I'm saying. So
yeah. Oh,
that's
and I
what
can
I
get
mean
that.
about the...
Yeah, and just a reminder, suicide hotline numbers are in the description.
Jesus.
So I totally agree with that there is this notion of your life, everybody has that life, right? Everybody has that life that has an exit. And so what you do with it, what your experience of it is, how you constitute it, what meaning you bring to it, and the ability to exit from it should not be connected. Right? So I think that's what I was trying to tell you is like, and I think your analogy does a good job of disconnecting it. So thank you for doing that.
So the analogy will disconnect it. In my mind, it's still not completely disconnected, but that's only because of the particular experience that I had, the way that it motivates me. So
and you've had a different experience.
Hey, by the way, just another tip: you could always wipe all your debts clean by just filing for bankruptcy. And now, if you file for bankruptcy, then you are starting at the point where you're better off than most people in the United States because you have zero debt now. So,
oh my God,
consider bankruptcy as an option.
It's not just about the debt. If you have debt,
I'm just giving people tips and like, hey.
So
like,
John M said down there, and are we kind of going over? John M said apparently the 750K was just an accounting glitch. If he'd waited a bit, it would have resolved itself. I believe, and that is where I was. What I was saying, that's why I mentioned it, to illustrate that people can get locked into this idea that this is the end of it and they cannot gain perspective on it. I
have a question. Why is
because it's on the rise right now?
I feel like we think it's
very,
a lot
very
worse.
aware.
I feel like we think it's a lot worse than it is because we have a huge fear of death. So we think that I look at it as I would like having control over my life. I want to have control over my death. If I could decide how to live my life, I want to be able to decide and control how I'm going to die. I don't think like just having seen it and experienced it the way that I have, and this is my personal experience, I think that the reason that we're so scared of saying, okay, it's okay to decide to end your life if you feel that that's the right decision, right? And obviously, you'd have to make sure that there's no serotonin depletion or any kind of other stuff going on. Right, there is something that's treatable. You'd have to, in consultation with your physician, you don't have to have a terminal disease to do that. If you feel like you need to do that and you want to take control over it,
I think death calls kind of come to mind when you say that too. It's just like they wanted to off themselves. Why didn't we, as a society, think that was okay?
Well, as a society, we didn't because we're so scared of death. But it's like what Armin's saying in terms of, I'm not saying that you're saying this, Armin, but if you're talking about immortality, like we just talked about it, like how many people are going to choose to die, right? And at that time, death will be an even more devastating thing because everybody's going to be immortal. So we're not going to accept it as some kind of natural thing. Well, everybody dies. Everybody dies.
It would be a tragedy. Imagine if going through 1,000 years of nobody dying, and if somebody dies, it's going to be like an international day of everybody, like it's going to be on the news. Everybody going to be crying like, oh my God, somebody actually could have potentially lived forever and now die. Like that would be it would be a bigger tragedy for someone to die if they could live forever. But I have a question. Why is suicide rates higher in countries where things seem to be better? Do you guys know? Like, for example, why do Canada and Scandinavian countries where all the happiness metrics are higher, seem to have higher suicide rates than Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia? How does that make any sense?
Well, I think the statistics are juked. I don't think we have real statistics from those countries.
I know. I think that's true too.
That's not something they hide. It's not like a religious thing that they would hide.
No, I do. believe that there's not a lot of in forensic pathology, there's a lot of bullshit in those
countries. Especially in those countries. So that we've seen.
But this has always seemed to be like, are they all like the lie? The inaccuracy has to be systematic in a way that is always showing us the same thing. Like, I don't think like it's.
I don't know that there's. So I guess that's a two-part question. One is, how large is the difference? And that may be what's affected by like data. Okay, we can say that there's probably different ways of categorizing, and there might be differences that arise in the data. But I do believe that what I've read points to things like social cohesion and like family. The family unit is differently oriented in our societies versus like. So there's a difference between.
So the conservatives are like, see, this is why you need families, and this is why like the whole breaking apart families and telling women that they don't need a man and you don't need to raise children and all of that.
So can I tell you my answer to that?
What?
Doctors have a suicide rate that's twice the national average.
Who?
Does that mean that doctors?
Oh.
So does that mean that doctors need to stop doing what they do? No, it's just consequence of. So that kind of thinking is also a consequence of a different way of thinking about things.
But that's not like, okay, what percentage of the society are doctors? So that's not going to move the needle by that much.
It's not about needle.
More
it's
women,
not
but so many women deciding that, oh, no family. So many men deciding, oh, I'm not going to get married, no children. That's like a major trend that is happening that is going to completely change the fabric of our society and break things apart.
Oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just repeating what the conservatives.
But it's a
that's
thing
different.
between.
That's a different thing.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of it's about relativity and expectations. So, for instance, if you're in Sweden or Norway, right, where the happiness indexes are really high. If you happen to be the minority of one of the people who has really, really fallen below the poverty line, the happiness thing, the people you're comparing to, like in an average kind of country,
maybe
people who are averagely happy are like, okay, yeah, I feel shitty, but the average person here just kind of feels a little bit less shitty. But if you're in a place where everybody says, oh, I'm so happy, this is great, I've got like free healthcare and whatever. I agree with free healthcare, by the way. But if you're in that situation and then you're completely screwed, I don't know what I'm promoting or not. And then you that relativity plays in. And the other thing is expectations.
I think it's the expectations, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So expectations are, for instance, if you're living in a society where you getting 3 meals a day and being able to feed your kids is a success for the day. And every time that anything past that is amazing. Right. Whereas if that is just a basic thing in some of these countries and your real expectation in life is self-actualization and finding Zen or whatever, and then you fall short of that, then you can fall depressed. There's a lot of.
I think it's not as black and white for sure.
No, there's a third factor, and this has actually been shown in data, is that extended family systems where there's a lot of people around, they tend to sort of force some kind of social structure on you. Whereas in nuclear families, there's people do tend to become more isolated. Some people do end up being prone to more isolation and alienation and that kind of
I'm just imagining how many people go in the street and they walking in the street and be like, oh, I'm so happy I have free healthcare. I just like literally imagining
that image in his head.
I have free healthcare. I'm so happy. Like walking
all of those people.
That's literally all of summer 2020. Is the people who are in New Zealand are going to be like, look at us. Sucks to be you.
Yeah, but these are. I just don't think I think it can be a motivating factor. I think, and again, drug abuse is more common.
And we need to get to do we have a few Patreon comments and questions?
Yeah,
we've got a few, and then we'll let Simi go too, because it's almost been 2 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
So did you introduce Susanna today as a white person? Did you do that to her?
You did. Yeah. Actually, you did.
Ali did that.
Armin
Me,
did.
I did that? Oh shit. Okay, never mind. I said Susanna is saying Habibis, how's everyone doing tonight? And I said, like, this is from Susanna. She's like, as white as snow. That's what I said before we went over. And she's saying Habibi. Um, wait, where is the comment?
People who speak Arabic are white, so that joke doesn't land on me.
Yeah,
Are
Oh,
they?
we're all white.
Jim King, my gosh. I got a fan. Thank you.
Oh.
Yes, I think you have more than one fan.
Okay, this is what I wanted to read. How do you pronounce this name? Inar?
Einar
Inar.
Thorstein.
Thorstensen?
Okay.
Thorstensen or Thorsteinsen?
It's
He or
The
the
son
name.
of Thorstein.
The name
That's a-
sounds like one of those high
Einar, I
index
think,
countries.
is male, but I don't know if it's a.
Sounds Viking. The
Yeah,
last
I
name
love it.
sounds
Hey,
Nordic.
high happiness index. You know,
Yeah.
So it seems to me that this fear of death is taught. If you have a problem with thinking about your own death and want to change it, then maybe thinking about the time when you didn't exist. Same thing. Yeah. And I think you had mentioned it earlier too, Einar. That's actually one of those ideas, right? Is if you want to think about the state after death, well, it's the same as the state before you were born. And so you are unaware of it too, and you will be unaware of it after. So this fear is the fear of the unknown that we've populated with our ideas, and this idea that there's pain even associated. Like the only time we know we feel pain is when we are conscious and alive. We don't know that we feel pain before birth or after death, you know? And
Yeah, but
yet
I know now. This is why I don't work. It doesn't work for me. People are like, okay, imagine how it felt like before you were born. It's just gonna be like that. And I'm like, okay, that fucking sucks, right? Because when I wasn't born, I wasn't
the
experiencing
time
all.
didn't exist for you. You didn't exist. So,
Yeah, but I exist now to notice that I didn't exist
right.
before.
And I
Me
think the
existing
question,
now. But yeah, I understand that when I die, I'm not gonna be sad about it that I'm dead because I'm not there to be sad about anything.
right,
But
right.
while I'm alive, I
Yeah.
could be sad about the fact that I'm not gonna be enjoying life and experience experience all the great things that humanity will be able to offer us in the future. We're going to be like the future for humanity, I think, is very bright. And I'm not going to be there for it. That is sad. That is very sad.
you're not going to know
So
that you're
this
not
is
gonna be there.
interesting. Yeah. So one, you're not going to know
You
that
know you
you're
missed the moon
there.
landing, right?
Wait, let Simi speak, Ali. Look. Okay, Simi, go on.
So that's a really interesting thought because the converse of how we think about death is affected really strongly by how we think about consciousness and life, right? And so why are we here? So this whole idea, unless you answer for yourself or for your community or for humanity itself, what are we actually doing here? Then we don't really have a complete context in which to think about death, right? And so we only use the context that we know, which is that this is better than that. And so in that context, this is awesome. I want more of this. Whereas we are all part of this contingent universe in every shape or form. And billions of people have lived and died, and ideas have come up, and things have happened, and billions of people are going to live and die. And to think that with our brain, that is infinitely less complex than this universe, we're going to be able to explain this complexity is kind of, I think, one of the things that we have to accept about our who we are is we will understand it. We will understand it in time. And I think your idea strikes me of immortality as interesting because if we are immortal, we'll get closer to understanding it. So that to me is the moral argument for we need immortality so we can actually figure out what it's like to live 100 years and figure out some of these ideas without being constrained by our
every second that people are focusing on religion and unnecessary politics, this is another reason why I think we fight against religion, because we could be doing so much more other things if we didn't have religion, right?
That's the point you made in your book, and I love that point that you always make, which is the sunk cost of religion.
Yes, the sunk cost of religion.
Very powerful idea.
Yeah,
it's how much it takes away from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have been. I think that everybody here doesn't realize how much we have been wronged, because we could have been where I think we could, where we're gonna be, 200 or 500 years ago, and we're so behind of that. And you guys right now, if you see a glimpse of what you might be missing, you would be crying right now. But you would be cursing all the people that would made humanity focus on different things instead of this. If you
the 2,000 years of religion, had nobody wandered the desert, and had the desert not had a messianic culture, had some idiots not put a black rock down somewhere and started praying to it, had those things not happen, where would we be today? That's a really interesting alternate history I'd like to think about.
Oh yeah, that should be a movie.
That'd be fun. Maybe that's the book we write, Ali.
There is a have you guys seen there's a cartoon called Tripping the Rift. I think it's called Tripping the Rift. It just ran for one season, and then the first thing, it was like they did actually go back to something happened. They went back to the Big Bang and they killed God. Apparently God created the Big Bang. They killed it, and there's no religion. And they had a really interesting episode about it. It was comedic, obviously, and it was sort of more superficial than what you're saying, but it was pretty funny.
We have to make this movie before religious people do it, because if they do it, they're going to make it look like everything got really a lot worse without religion.
They're going to Ken Ham that shit.
I don't think they're going to do it. I don't think
that guy. He looks like the chimp we put in the moon.
Hey, that's not nice to chimps.
Don't.
I know. It's the only thing wrong with that statement.
Yeah. Jim King is saying Simi is great. She seems like a really cheerful and smart and insightful woman. It would be fun to sit and chat with her. I hope she comes on from time to time as a third host. She adds to the conversation.
Wait, did you just assume her gender?
Huh?
Oh no, I think he looked at my tits. It's all right.
But you've got atheist written right across them.
Exactly, and I'm on the secular jihadist post. I mean, this was a T-shirt for this podcast or whatever it is.
Oh, what are you gonna do? But he's a fan either way.
Thank you.
Height. Was it?
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Has been talking about increased number of serious teen suicides attempts, especially for girls on social media. That's absolutely true. And
I would beg to differ. I would say that the teen suicide attempts that I've seen are absolutely not related to social media. I think social media, the proportion of effect that social media has is significant, but not all of it. I don't think it explains it all. I think it's that we are unmasking a lot of mental health issues right now with this completely abnormal reality that we have. The youngest suicide I've seen is an 11-year-old.
What is it? Why was that? Can you talk about it?
It was an 11-year-old. An 11-year-old has no abstract thinking. An 11-year-old thinks very like A leads to B leads to C, and is very like they see problems as very self-centric. So, my mom must be upset because I did something, right? Even though your mom's not upset at you in particular, but because she's upset because you are attached to her, you're still thinking that you are in some way, shape or form responsible for that. And so any kind of emotional upset, any kind of instability. So this kid, it was actually just nothing major. It's no different than any of the arguments I've had with my kids. It was a very pro se kind of argument, and he hung himself. And I think if you want to talk about the factors that led to that and how to prevent it and everything, I mean, we're talking deep system-wide changes, right? It's the reality of the moment right now. There's a lot that's going to happen and is happening that is out of our control. And I think that is the part of all of this, talking about all of this, that really makes us all very anxious.
Wow.
I'm going to talk about this last comment by Jim. You want to read it? I don't know.
Yeah, if we are in a virtual or digital world, if people commit suicide or die that we love, we could recreate them in our virtual world. I've actually had an idea like that. I was like, that would be cool if like 40 years from now, if I died and my entire digital archive was available, and there was technology to just like restart my brain, restart a consciousness that was recreated from everything that I ever put out there, right?
Would that be
well, okay, that's exactly what I want to mention. Like, I think you should be able to even recreate people who didn't produce anything based on people's memories of them, right? but it's going to be a lot easier for people who have like videos out there or have work out there. People could recreate them. And the question of whether they would be the same people or not, it's very interesting that people ask that, but they don't ask that about us, because we technically, it's the arrangement of whatever makes our consciousness that makes us, not the literal physical particles, because the literal physical particles change fully every 3 years, I think, right?
Or seven, something like that.
Something like that. But if you think that means death, then we are dying every few years, right? So there's nothing literally there's nothing that connects us when it comes to physically to who we were just a few years ago. So if
that's
you
exactly right, actually.
Yes,
biologically, that's exactly right. And when you look at kids and how they grow, that physical person that my kids were when they were 5 no longer exists.
Right. So it's about whatever the arrangement of the particles that creates your consciousness. So if you could recreate that, then technically that's them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that was explored. Like he said, I think there was a Black Mirror idea similar to this. Jim King said that.
Oh my God.
And I think that's what I'm referring to. There was an old woman who they had built a clone that looked exactly like her husband that she loved from back in the day, and she was older, and she was having these conversations with him, and that was like a really striking kind of understanding, because she knew on some level that it wasn't real, and she actually got angry at it, if I recall. She was just like, it seemed like a good idea. It was done by her kids as like, oh, in this futuristic world, this is what we can provide, and why wouldn't you want to have your favorite person to talk to? And she actually did enjoy a lot of her interactions with him, but to a certain extent she realized that it wasn't him and that it wasn't real for that reason. It's that whole sense of like, what's real?
I find it interesting that there's always this like Black Mirror is obviously dystopian and it's very, very terrifying. Like it usually describes all these dystopias in the future because of technology. But in real life, either those dystopias don't really pan out the way they were predicted, or we just get used to them and we just kind of don't see them as bad. It's like 1984. I mean, we're beyond George Orwell's 1984.
We are
right now, well beyond it. But there's it's not as bad as it was thought to be.
We are, and we are hugely adaptive.
Partly because of books like George Orwell's.
No, it's
right.
But no, Simi. Sorry, Simi.
Simi.
Okay.
Simi.
What's the question?
We're asking.
No, you were gonna say you were saying something, and Ali keeps interrupting you, and I'm not letting him.
Yeah, but then Armin interrupted me when I stopped interrupting you.
Wow, this is like a whole round robin of interruptions. I think
about this.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea of the George Orwell, right? Like, you're right that we live in a dystopian world right now where we have accepted things. Like I walk through the hospital, I'm like, holy shit, what kind of life am I living right now? And I have this moment of, I want to go back to December 2019. I have the Dorothy moment of take me back to Kansas, let this nightmare stop. But we are hugely adaptable. And I do believe that that's because we are fundamentally different as humans now. We interact with screens more. Our brains are evolving at an astonishing rate. We're a neuroplastic, being. So that's my answer to that.
So I think the good thing about, I think the future is going to be more closer to utopian prediction than dystopian predictions. But part of making sure that happens is dystopian predictions to warn us about the problem. The problem. I think it's good that we have Black Mirror episodes and stuff so that people constantly think about how things could go wrong, so that more people are trying to avoid that, right?
We've hit upon a really central idea in education right now. So I read a lot of Ken Robinson. Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, the education that.
Right, and he talks about this idea that education, the way we do it now, is stuck in the 19th century, right? It's all assembly line education. We don't treat the child, as a growing mind that deserves to be nurtured and flourished, and the potential that is locked in there needs to be unleashed, right? We never think about it that way. We think about it in the way of how to create widgets and how to distribute those widgets in the most to the system, like beneficial to the system way. And
Right.
and we've definitely lost our humanity in that way, and so this idea of education and what you're talking about, Armin, kind of like connects, is that we're gonna have to contend with this idea that humanity is multi-potential, that humanity has this potential that we have yet to understand and unleash. And when we do, we're gonna really like look back and go, what the fuck were we all thinking? Like, I really do agree.
Well, that's a good note. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say what you were going to say. That's a good note to show on.
Yeah. No, but Simi was going to say something.
No,
Simi's
that's
too
it.
polite. Oh, okay, good.
I'm too polite. It's years of talking to this guy. No, this was fun, guys. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, it was fun for me. I really enjoyed the way you phrase things.
Yeah.
Especially when you confirm what I say, but you say it in a much more intelligent and nuanced way. I was like, you make me sound smarter than I am.
That's why we've stayed in touch.
That's the trick. That's the educator's trick. You just repeat what somebody said back to them and be like, oh yeah, I totally understand it. That's exactly why, right? But you just improved their idea, but they think it was theirs.
Wait, you just ruined it. It's all gone.
I'm giving away the secrets, man.
Stop doing that.
I was sitting at a dean's, like the medical school dean was giving a lecture, and literally my phrase came out of his mouth. Something that I had put in an article that got circulated. And I was like, this is culture change. This is how you do it. You put better ideas out there. You put language out there. You put it in enough brains. And one of my faculty and I, we realized it. We have like this Friday afternoon curriculum that we do with the residents, and we do whatever the hell we want. This time we did like racial bias. Like, we make up the curriculum. We teach exactly at where they want to be, So we had like a session on failing better in medicine, and where we like all said, yeah, we're failures, and this is how you deal with failure. But what I'm trying to get at is like, this is where we need, this is the kind of this is the kind of engagement we need to have to get into the next phase that we're talking about.
But we forgot one question, by the way. John was asking this last question. What would you change in the system, Simi? I think this is when you were talking about the system, suicides and stuff.
Yeah.
Can you be maybe a little bit more specific in the system of?
When you were talking about the 11-year-old patient that you had who, whoever it was who killed himself, the kid.
I would change this idea that our lives need to be lived. Like, we have to spend 40 hours a day to just put food on the table. I think that is an idea. So I think those are all connected.
Yeah.
So the reason why these things happen to kids is if your parent is having to work 60 to 80 hours a week, how are they going to parent you? So when we have this idea of like low income people and giving them money and universal basic income, everybody forgets that person, that you are making them more available to their child in the home. And what we need is more parents able to be less stressed out and in their homes with their children being able to be a parent. I think that's something that we all benefited from, is having parents who are able to parent us in a way and love us, like that's the one thing that I would change in the system, is no child should have a situation in which they don't have at least one adult looking out for them. Mm-hmm. And that's all they need. That's literally all a child needs, is like one adult to say, I believe in you. We've had so many turnarounds at my work where kids come in, they're on the streets 6 months, 8 months, they're just junkied up and all of that. And they come in because they developed a medical problem for which we have to keep them trapped in the hospital. And in those 6 weeks, those 8 weeks, those 12 weeks, they experience what it's like to be respected for the first time. And they don't want to leave. Sometimes they come back and just to visit, and they're like, oh, you guys are the best, and that made me realize sad. It's like, the little things we do matter. And it shows people that there are things that are worth living for. And I think that is where we end up with this whole conversation. It's just like, we have to make this life that we're all in, this reality, worth living for. And if we can do that, I think systems change, right? Like, if I'm working to do that for everybody and everybody's working to do that, it automatically it's all boats rising.
Okay.
Fair for me, one carrying television for the child. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
so where can people find you, Simi? Just throw out your Twitter and your whatever it is.
Oh, I'm at Soraya Simi. Um,
Well, it's in the description. It's at SURAIYASI.
Not in the private Patreon only version. All of the things that we mentioned is going to be in the description. It's going to be in the public audio version of the description.
YouTube,
We're not.
all that.
Yeah. Yes. So this is the. If you're watching the video version of this, you're a patron, or somebody shared you a link with you that they shouldn't have, right? So either one of those two things, right? But if you want to participate in a Patreon live discussions, also consider link in the description, become a patron. Not only you will be able to join in these discussions, you would also be helping us get to 500 patrons. And if we get to 500 patrons, we will take the most important episodes that we have when it comes to Islam, and we'll translate them into Persian, Arabic, Urdu, Indonesian, Malay, and other languages. So help us get there.
Bangla. I want to do Bangla.
Bangla. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Oh
I
my
forgot.
God.
That's important. Yes.
So Bangladesh has probably turned into one of the most intolerant nations. I don't go back there anymore. That's a whole other episode.
Yes.
And-
Make a list, Ali. That's a good episode.
Okay. And for those of you who are patrons who are listening to this, and even for the people listening to this on public, our next episode is going to be another sort of blockbuster. We've got Abdullah Gandil coming here, talk about the evidence. He's actually going to do a presentation on how there are differences in different versions of the Quran, and it's not preserved.
That one is going to be a lot better for our patrons, because the video version of it, we will be able to show the presentation on the screen, but we're going to for the pub audio version, we'll just describe it as much as we can.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do, but that's going to be pretty wild, so stay tuned for that. And then we've got the Q&A, Armin and I, end of June. End of June is already here on Sunday night.
Oh, the Q&A is going to be, I think, turn into a fight over race stuff.
I can't wait.
Oh.
It will be
watch Ali go down.
It will be the anti-racist versus Armin the racist. Absolutely. That's what we're going to do. Armin is going to be for racism. I'm going to be against racism. And it'll be
keep telling yourself that. Keep telling yourself that, Ali.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. This was a lot of fun. This was actually felt very different from the other episodes. Not that those are.
Yeah, it was very chill.
Yeah, it was really good. So thanks.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Okay, everybody.
Thank you all for your support.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.